Before the video starts, I want everybody to know that I'm going to be using backgrounds of video games that I play. They will probably be the backgrounds of the videos that I have so that you're not just staring at a PowerPoint slide. I still will use slides and things like that because I know there's a lot of people who like those. When I bring up points, I still will use those slides so that you can look at it real quick and get all the information quickly. But uh, it is kind of boring just to watch a slide or stare at a slide for, 15 minutes. So hope you guys enjoy this better. Hey everybody, it's Rothbar's Disciple here. We're going to talk about Bitcoin again, and we're going to be talking about the SLP token system as well. Mainly because I got a response finally from one of the developers who was involved in SLP. There's a lot of them. I've been trying to bait them into responses for the longest goddamn time so I can at least, directly refute what they're saying. So what I got at least John Fukeball to say was that he said he didn't think that I understood the Byzantine fault tolerance all that well, which it was kind of obvious he didn't listen to or he didn't watch my video. Um, because obviously he's talking about Byzantine fault tolerance in terms of the fact that you need to have proof of work miners to have Byzantine fault tolerance, and I'm talking about applying or creating token systems that are Byzantine fault tolerant. But again, if they don't have their own miners, it raises the question of how is that possible? And what I'm saying is that you can cheat the system once you already have the Byzantine fault tolerant layer of Bitcoin, that you can add new layers which aren't Byzantine fault tolerant themselves, but anytime you need Byzantine fault tolerance, that's when you're actually using the Bitcoin layer rather than your second layer, which is your tokens. Okay. And so I just want to clear that up because again, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about using data in Byzantine fault tolerant ways, because everyone keeps talking in Bitcoin Cash. There's this huge split in the community about people who, they're not sure whether or not they want to support non-financial transactions. Okay, and the main reason is that people, when they're talking about financial transactions, they'll say two things. It'll be one, that's what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin's supposed to be money. But two, then they'll say that's also where the Byzantine fault tolerance is. And both of these statements are false within the Bitcoin Cash community. Nobody has it correct. So the first thing is just that Bitcoin is not um, necessarily money. Bitcoins themselves, they're the money token that are on Bitcoin, but the tokens themselves, the money token, Bitcoins themselves, they're just data. Okay, it's just data that is added to the blockchain in a very intelligent way, so as not to add much bloat to the blockchain, but also putting on all the necessary data to create a contractually enforceable money transfer. Okay, and that's what Bitcoin is. Okay, and so again, it doesn't have anything necessarily to do with money. The bitcoins themselves do. Okay, but Bitcoin itself doesn't necessarily have anything to do with money. It's just a messaging system for data. Period. Okay. Now, obviously, you have to remember that Bitcoin it's a blockchain. They're not efficient data stores, so you really don't want to do what BSV does. Although you'll find out that's exactly what SLP does. But then, moving on to our second point where everybody gets Bitcoin wrong is the fault tolerance. Now, they'll try and tell you that the Byzantine fault tolerance only applies to the base layer, and this is not true. It's the secondary layers that you build on top of the base layer, so long as they don't, contradict, I guess would be the word that I would use here. As long as they don't invalidate what Bitcoin's already doing, they get the same protections that Bitcoin has. And a good way to put this is like, if you're going for, I don't freaking know, a spacewalk or something like that, and you need a spacesuit to protect yourself from radiation, but once you have your radiation protection, you don't need like radiation protection inside your radiation protection. Once you already have your radiation protection, the inner layers that you have, like they don't have to have it because you already have it. You know what I mean? It's just like you got to make sure not to, have something on the inside that's going to pierce your radiation layer, because then you don't have protection from the radiation. It's really not complicated. It's just you just have to build it right. And so let's go ahead and talk about a couple examples for when this would be useful. And these examples are really simple. It's a really simple example. It's just going to be a universal contract because again, the entire point of this conversation that I was having with Donald Fuqball and or attempting to have, which they've been trying to avoid with me, but it's just that. Um, if you've solved the Byzantine generals problem, and again, Bitcoin is just a protocol by which you can send data between nodes, and the main way people send data is through the value token, which people call Bitcoins. But that's the main message people send is just financial data. You should be able to have contracts that are universal, and by that we just mean contracts that instead of having a contract where you and your lawyers sit down with another person and you get their signatures and you're all face to face, and there's a bunch of trust involved where you have to make sure you're dealing with this person like the actual person themselves. With Bitcoin, you can create universal contracts where you associate your identity with a Bitcoin address, and obviously you have to do this in some way that whoever enforces the law in your jurisdiction that they would be okay with, but or because they're going to be the ones enforcing it. Obviously, if you're going to be doing or utilizing legally enforceable contracts, somebody has to enforce them. So there has to be an enforcement arm involved in this. But again, since you have wallet addresses that can be associated to your identity, you can do this really, really easily. But once you have a wallet address associated with somebody's identity, now you can create a contract that you just say, hey, anybody who wants to fulfill this contract or engage in this business with me or in business that is governed by this particular contract, just let me know and I'll send you a token, okay? And so then once you've sent somebody a token, this token can represent your consent to the contract, right? And so by doing this, both parties, even without knowing each other, you can have legally enforceable contracts because Bitcoin solves the trustless aspect of sending messages between two parties in a trustless manner. And then since you just have associated with your Bitcoin wallets, your identity and all the information that is required for legally enforceable contracts, you're able to solve the Byzantine generals problem just for data in general, not just for transaction data, but just for data in general. And now, for those of you who are, big fans of Bitcoin Cash and SLP who are listening, who are really trying to pick apart this argument, what you'll have noticed so far is that there's no reason that you would think at first glance that Electron Cash shouldn't be able to do this. But I'm going to show here real shortly, because I've covered this before, but I'm going to show here real shortly how Electron Cash SLP cannot do this at all. You cannot do universal contracts with Electron Cash SLP because, again, I said this before, but Bitcoin transactions, right, they're just data. So the protocol that you use on Bitcoin transactions can be applied to other data as well. But if you look at the protocol that SLP uses for data, SLP uses Bitcoin SV's Metanet protocol. They don't use the Bitcoin protocol. It's really fucked up. But anyways, let's explain that real quick. It might be a little confusing at first, just because SLP, when you look at a lot of the things that exist today and you try to see, well, is it sort of Byzantine fault tolerant for if you're trying to, build an application for this, the answer can be yes, but the answer is not always yes. Okay, and so what I mean by that is you can put data onto the blockchain using SLP. If you want to put a contract on there, you can. It's limited in size to, it's a little over like 5 kilobytes, whatever. I think it was like there's 25 chain transactions that you're allowed right now. And I've always wondered too, because there's a big sort of there's a big hullabaloo going on right now within the Bitcoin Cash community about chain transactions. I wonder how much SLP plays a role in this because, if SLP is based on UTXOs and you change the amount of chain transactions that you can have, can like people abuse that to fuck with SLP? I don't really know. That'd be really dangerous. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's just weird. But anyways, you can put the 5 kilobytes of data on there, but again, you're putting just raw data on there, and this is really, really, really weird to me because if you're trying to put transaction data onto Bitcoin, like if when you link your transaction, like if I'm trying to create a new transaction, I create the hash of the previous transaction in my new transaction that I've created. But when people put raw data on the blockchain, it's like, well, if that's the way Satoshi wanted it, why would why would he link a previous hash of the last transaction instead of linking all the previous transaction history? You know what I mean? So there's no uh, this is a completely new way of doing things. You know what I mean? This is not the original Bitcoin vision. This is not Satoshi's vision. It's hilarious that Bitcoin Satoshi's vision has followed the Metanet path because it's not Satoshi's vision. So uh, I don't know why they do this in the first place, but you can put contracts on there. The one thing you have to remember, though, is that there's a lot of contracts that are going to be more than 5 kilobytes. Um, yeah, there's nothing more that I can say other than that. It's going to be more than 5 kilobytes. And somebody's going to say, oh, you can add datas onto SLP, or you can add hashes onto SLP, and you can, but you can't link them together, and this is super dangerous because again, you can use Bitcoin for more things than currently exists. Okay, that's the thing about a new technology is you can always do new things with it, right? So if we go back to universal contracts, which again, if you have a Byzantine fault tolerant system, you can make them. That's a fact. It's guaranteed. But if you go to that, let's say you create a universal contract on something like Bitcoin, if you can only put one hash, associate one hash with one token, that means you can only put one contract up there. This is super dangerous because you're then bound by that contract forever. It's a legally verifiable contract. You know what I mean? There's no, like, you can't say, oh, I want to change the contract, or maybe I just want to stop. I mean, you technically can, but you have to create a new token, and then that creates its own problems because, again, you're not supposed to do that using the SLP token system. You always want to have one original token ID or token hash. So you absolutely cannot fulfill these functions. And we're not doing anything super crazy to fulfill that function again. You just follow the Bitcoin protocol. So when we're adding non-transaction data to Bitcoin, just so you guys know, um, we're using a completely centralized structure, a completely dictatorial structure, because again, just like how Bitcoin, or just like how if you go to space, you get your radiation shielding and then you don't need that layer anymore. We already have decentralization within Bitcoin. It's just like in the free market, each business is an absolute fucking dictatorship. 100% absolute dictatorship. Yet it doesn't matter because every business is in the free market, or as long as you have a free market, it doesn't matter. Okay? When you have things like socialism, you're fucked because now your base layer is centralized and your businesses on top are centralized. You know what I mean? So you're fucked. But uh, and we need to follow the same model with Bitcoin as the free market. Have a base layer that's decentralized, then build centralized as fuck on top of it. The reason why you build centralized as fuck on top of it is for legal reasons. Having somebody responsible if somebody messes up. That's just as important as having incentives for profit is having incentives for punishment for wrongdoing. Okay, and so we're going to build completely centralized node structure that is identical to Bitcoin. We're going to have our own centralized miners, but in this case, the centralized miners are going to be businesses who have created tokens, and they're going to confirm transactions. And again, these transactions are just going to be transactions that are for the token, and so obviously there's whatever data is related to the token is involved in this. A lot of times you're dealing with transactions of data when you're dealing with tokens. But when you're dealing with these transactions of data, and it's absolutely essential to just remember the differences between these two layers because you're using them in completely different ways. So we talked about universal contracts earlier and how you need to be able to negate a contract or you just change it. Like the idea of having a legally enforceable contract that you create now that is enforceable forever, that is open for anybody else to just come in and start working with you on is insane. Um, so you need to be able to change that contract, and you can't do that within SLP. And you can't do that, I think, primarily because of the way that they have set up their UTXO system. I'm not completely sure. I don't know enough to really say on that. But if you want to change a contract, the way that we do it on our a properly functioning token system, and I actually like to call the tokens seals rather than tokens in this system, because the seals just exist to prove the integrity of some form of data. Um, but the way that you do that is you just add data on the second layer that will just say delete. That will say on the first layer, delete this item on the second layer. So when your second layer reads that, it'll interpret it and it'll be like, okay, this item does not exist on the second layer, but everything still exists on the first layer. And so in this way, you can never delete the data that is associated with token transfers and whatnot, because it's the data is always going to be there on the original Bitcoin transaction or on the original Bitcoin blockchain. And this is completely different to the UTXO based system where you can kind of just delete shit and things don't get stored. Because I'm pretty sure, as far as I know, you don't store UTXOs. That's the whole point. Is you just keep the, like, once there's 0 Bitcoin in an address. Obviously, if there's 0 Bitcoin in that address, it can only receive Bitcoin. It can never send Bitcoin, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. But now, actually going into the details of the example itself, if we're talking about a universal contract, and in our case, we're going to use music because everyone in the world round knows music. A universal contract is, again, a contract you can create with anybody, and this is actually super useful for musicians because there's a lot of contracts that they probably would want to make that they can't. And we'll start off with contracts that they would probably like to make with their fans. And we're not going to focus on the big name musicians for the primary reason that there's less big name musicians than there are struggling musicians, okay? And so we want to focus on helping out the masses. Like, if you want to get rich, build for the poor. There's just because there's more of them. You know what I mean? The rich got a lot of money, but there's only so many rich, and they can only spend so much money. But if we're talking about a musician who's struggling and they're selling tickets for a show, one problem that they have in the modern era, I guess you could call it, is that a lot of times they'll try and sell CDs and whatnot. They'll try and sell their music at these shows, and so they'll have CDs, or they'll tell you like, hey, go to iTunes, you can buy my CD here. Um, and a lot of times, if they're selling physical CDs, since they can, they set the price on that, unless they already unless they already have a deal, which is unlikely because we're talking about struggling musicians. But unless they already have a deal, they set the price. So a lot of times, if they're selling CDs, they'll set the price at a discount. Now, the problem here is that if you are a fan of the music, you have to buy the CD that night, otherwise you're not going to get the discount. And this is kind of a bad marketing. It's a bad marketing shtick just from the standpoint of most people go to a show are not worrying about buying the music the night that they go to the show. A lot of times they're worrying about getting laid or just having a good time, or they just get like way too drunk. It's just not exactly the best time to promote your music. Like, obviously, if they're drunk or whatever, maybe they'll be more likely to spend more money on your music, or maybe they'll think the music's good even if it's not. But what you really want as a struggling musician is just to get your music out there. So it'd be cool if you could somehow give them access to that discount for forever. Because as a struggling musician, you don't give a shit if they buy it now or in a year. Like, you just want them to buy it so that you can get big. Um, so what you could actually do with a token is you could create this token that when you sell somebody a ticket to the show, all they have to do, and again, they don't have to pay with your um, or for your ticket with Bitcoin. It could be helpful. I'm not going to go into the details here. It could be helpful for them to pay with Bitcoins, but it's not required. They would just need a Bitcoin address associated to their identity. And as long as they have an address associated to their identity, when they buy a ticket, you can send tokens to their address, and then that token can represent a sale on your music from now in perpetuity. And the reason why this is super important, why you can't do this on SLP, because again, people are going to be like, well, if you're just trying to sell a CD, you can put that contract easily in under 5 kilobytes and put it on SLP as a token. You could do it. It's like, well, you I mean, you technically can, but the problem is with the struggling musician, you're you're always creating new music and you're always changing your old music, and one of the most important things for struggling musician is to get rid of bad songs, because when you start making songs like some of them are just gonna suck. Okay, a lot of them are gonna be middling, where it's like, oh, that was okay. You're gonna have some that are just killer, and then some are gonna suck. And you need to get rid of the ones that suck. Ones that suck are so bad, because then if someone's trying to play this and play it like to their friends, but then some music comes up that's just so bad that it makes them want to turn it off, then you're never getting played again. You know what I mean? But anyways, no matter how you slice it, uh, a new struggling musician is going to change their music, and so that deal that they're offering to the person who came to view their music is going to change. Now, you could probably have some caveat within the contract that says that whoever came to the show, like they would have for sure access to whatever songs were on the CD at the time of the show, because maybe they want that authentic music. Maybe that's what they really liked. Maybe you change your music and they don't like the change and they want the original music. So maybe you have a caveat in that contract, and there's nothing stopping you from doing that. But the whole point is that they can change that contract later on, and this is useful for all parties involved. And again, you cannot change contracts with Electron Cash SLP. You absolutely cannot do it. And there's no way for you to change tokens either to sort of try and mimic it, um, because it just introduces massive attack vectors for fraudulent parties. And this is the type of shit that I'm saying, is that if Jono Fuqball is going to say to me that Electron Cash SLP is Byzantine fault tolerant, then I want him to show me how to do what I just described, how you can do a universal contract with your fans so that you can just have these contracts that can change but are legally enforceable, and you know legally enforceable throughout time, I guess, as long as all parties involved consent to them being legally enforceable. Show me, brother. Nobody ever does. No, I mean, they have a few times. There's been like 2 times I've been shown wrong, but we will see. Come on, Fuke Ball. Come out of hiding. Come out of your cave.